Good morning students, I am Dr. Abhishek Kumar Singh, Tutor, Department of Physiology, NMCH, Gaya. And today we will continue with the chapter of CNS, and in that we are discussing every class, taking one of the topic at a time. Last class we talked about physiology of pain. So today we are going to talk the next another very important topic, and that will be sensory cortex and abnormality of sensory abnormalities. We'll talk about sensory cortex. So you have seen this picture before many times. This is the part of the brain which you are seeing, where every part is labeled properly. You can see here, and you can see the sensory, the primary somatosensory cortex, about which we are going to talk today. So the cortical area which is associated with processing of the somatic sensory information collectively forms the somatosensory cortex. This is the somatosensory cortex, this which we are talking about. Third order neuron project here. We have seen the ascending pathways. The third order neuron, they project to the somatosensory cortex. They have two areas. The primary areas are S1 and S2. The primary somatosensory area 1 and the primary somatosensory area 2, also called as secondary somatosensory area. S1 is present in the post-central gyrus, which includes Brodmann's area 3, 1 and 2. You can see here, this is the post-central gyrus where we have somatosensory cortex, and these are the Brodmann labeled areas 1, 3, 1 and 2. These are the areas which are present in this post-central gyrus. They form S1, while the secondary somatosensory area is located in the wall of the sylvian fissure. This here it is located, the secondary somatosensory cortex. Then we have area 5. You can see here, this is area 5. This area 2 is located in the upper lip of the posterior ramus of the lateral sulcus, or in the wall of the sylvian fissure. You can see here. Then we have Brodmann's area 5. The diagram is shown where the area 5 is situated. This is called as somatosensory association cortex. It is present in the posterior parietal lobe. Then we have supplementary sensory areas and other supplementary areas like area 4, precentral gyrus, and cortical area surrounding the secondary somatosensory area called as 7B. What are the functions? They are involved in the initial processing of the somatosensory inputs. When we have a lesion of the primary somatosensory area, they affect stereognosis, proprioception, fine touch. You know all these terms, right? Then the association cortex, they form, the major function is to coordinate the relationship of the body to the extra-personal space, like hand-eye coordination. Finer aspects of sensations are more processed in the sensory cortical areas, and pain and temperature are least processed in this area. This is about the association cortex which we have seen. Then we go to the spinal cord. We'll talk in very short about the functions of the spinal cord. Sometimes it comes as a short note. So we'll talk about this. Sensory function. Sensations entering the spinal cord in dorsal root ganglia are conveyed to brain by ascending either in dorsal column of the same side or in spinothalamic tract of the opposite side. The sensory functions are these. The motor functions controls tone and power of muscles, movement of muscles and joints, deep tendon reflexes, superficial reflexes. Autonomic functions include they regulate body temperature, visceral functions like regulating the activity of smooth muscles, heart and glands of GIT. The main function of autonomic function is to maintain the optimal internal environment of the body. Then we come to another very important short notes you get are spinal cord lesions. These lesions could be due to transection, that is cutting across the cord of the spinal cord. This is called transection. And this can be a complete transection, there can be an incomplete transection, there can be hemisection of the spinal cord. When do we get complete transection in practical life? Like in cases of gunshot injury, you can get a complete transection. Dislocation of the spine, occlusion of the blood vessel, commonest site being the mid-thoracic level. There can be two clinical stages of this complete transection. There can be stage of spinal shock or stage of flaccidity, and the second is the stage of reflex activity. We'll again talk about these in later classes. Now the level of transection and extent of paralysis. You can see the spinal cord here. You can see the cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral and coccygeal spines. See the numbers are given 1 to 7 the cervical, 1 to 12 the thoracic, then 1 to 5 the lumbar and then the sacral fused vertebrae and coccygeal. Now where the level of lesion is and what kind of paralysis you can get here. For that you have to know about two terms. One is called paraplegia, another one is quadriplegia. You can get these terms as an MCQ question. Paraplegia is complete paralysis of the lower half of the body. You can see in the diagram here, the red portion which is showing the complete paralysis of the lower half of the body, including both the legs, and they are usually caused by damage to the spinal cord. While quadriplegia is quadriplegia. These two diagrams shows the area of involvement in quadriplegia, which is complete paralysis of the body from neck downwards, means it includes arms as well as leg. You see here that at the level of C4 injury, you can get quadriplegia. At the level of C6 injury, that is the sixth cervical vertebra, you can get this quadriplegia as a presentation the patient can present to you. Then at the level of T6, sixth thoracic vertebrae injury, you can get what we just talked, paraplegia, which is the paralysis of the lower half of the body including both legs. And quadriplegia was the paralysis which involved the body from the neck down. So C4, C6 injuries level, at C4, C6 injury levels you can get quadriplegia. When the injury is at the level of T6, which is the sixth thoracic vertebrae, or at the first lumbar vertebrae, you can get paraplegia. Very clearly shown in the picture. Then we come to another very important topic in the spinal cord lesion, and that is called as hemisection. That is a result of hemisection of the spinal cord, and this condition is called as Brown-Sequard syndrome. You get very commonly short notes and minor questions, MCQ questions on Brown-Sequard syndrome. What is this Brown-Sequard syndrome? This is the lesion involving one lateral half of the spinal cord. Here the autonomic functions are normal, but other other functional changes are divided into 3 categories. Level 1, first category is changes which are seen below the level of hemisection, changes at the level of hemisection, and third, the functional changes seen above the level of hemisection. We'll talk about all the changes one by one. First is the changes below the level of hemisection on the same side. Changes are divided into sensory changes and motor changes. What are the sensory changes you see on the same side below the level of lesion? First, sensory changes: fine touch, tactile localization and discrimination, vibration and kinesthetic senses are lost due to damage of dorsal column. Pain, temperature and crude touch remains unaffected as the spinothalamic tract crosses to the opposite side and escapes injury. If you remember the pathway of the spinothalamic tract, you will be able to understand this phenomena. Then the changes below the level on the same side. What are the motor changes you see? First, extensive paralysis of upper motor neuron type. We'll talk about this upper motor neuron or a lower motor neuron type of lesions when we talk about the descending pathways, the pyramidal and extrapyramidal pathways in the coming classes. So you will understand then that time better. So extensive paralysis of the upper motor neuron type due to damage to the crossed pyramidal tracts. Pyramidal tracts are the descending tracts. Some muscles on the same side may not be paralyzed. Then there is also another motor change, that is temporary loss of vasomotor tone due to damage to the descending fibers from the vasomotor center in the medulla to the lateral horn cell, which leads to dilatation of blood vessel and fall in blood pressure. Again, we'll talk about the vasomotor center in medulla in the coming classes. So for here, just you remember that there is the damage to the descending fibers from VMC in the medulla, that is vasomotor center in medulla, to the lateral horn cell, leading to dilatation of blood vessels, resulting in fall in blood pressure. What are the changes below the level on the opposite side? Earlier slide we saw the changes below the level on the same side, sensory changes and motor changes. Now we are talking changes on the opposite side, below the level. Sensory changes: complete loss of pain, temperature and crude touch due to damage to spinothalamic fibers which comes from the opposite side. Second, kinesthetic sensations, fine touch, etc. will persist as the posterior column of the opposite side is not damaged. So kinesthetic sensation and fine touch will persist. Motor changes on the opposite side: either no paralysis or paralysis of few muscles occur, which is upper motor neuron type of paralysis. This is due to possible involvement of some fibers of direct pyramidal tract of the same side when these fibers cross. Pyramidal tract, descending tracts. Therefore, below the level of the lesion on the same side, there is extensive motor loss but little sensory loss. While on the opposite side, there is extensive sensory loss but little motor loss, just the vice versa. And this phenomena is called as Brown-Sequard syndrome. That is, in short, if we can summarize this, it is hemiparaplegia on the same side while hemianesthesia on the opposite side. The figure shows all the area of cord damage, hemisection, half of the spinal cord is damaged. So the loss of pain, temperature and light touch on the opposite side, while this is the opposite side, this is the damage, this is the opposite side. So loss of pain, temperature and light touch on the opposite side, while the loss of motor function, vibration, position and deep touch sensation on the same side of the cord damage, the hemisection lesion. Now what are the changes at the level of the hemisection on the same side and on the opposite side? The sensory changes are complete anesthesia occurs due to damage to the posterior nerve root, posterior horn cells and spinothalamic fibers which cross on the opposite side. Motor changes, complete lower motor neuron type of paralysis due to damage to anterior horn cell. So there was upper motor neuron, here it is lower motor neuron type of paralysis. Also complete and permanent vasomotor paralysis occur due to damage to the lateral horn cells. This was all on the same side, the sensory and the motor changes at the level of hemisection. Then on the opposite side, sensory changes, some loss of pain sensation due to injury of pain fibers of spinothalamic tract. So some loss of pain sensation. And motor changes, nil or very slight due to damage of some pyramidal tracts of the same side. Now what are the changes above the level of the hemisection? We talked about below the level, we talked about at the level, now we talked the changes, the functional changes above the level of hemisection. On the same side, there is a band of hyperesthesia present due to irritation of the upper cut end of the damaged fiber. So there will be a band of hyperesthesia, while on the opposite side there will be hyperesthesia, maybe the referred type. Now what are the regional peculiarities? Hemisection in the cervical region causes constriction of pupil on the same side, loss of biceps, triceps and supinator and pronator jerks. We will talk about all these jerks when we talk about reflexes. These jerks will come. Biceps, triceps, supinator and pronator. These all the names are derived from their respective muscles from which these jerks are elicited. And you know about these muscles from your anatomy lectures. If C4, C5 and C6 segments are involved, when these 4, 5 and 6 segments are involved, these jerks are lost. Then there is paralysis of the diaphragm on the same side due to phrenic nerve involvement. So there is same side involvement of the diaphragm if there is a hemisection in the cervical region. Now hemisection in the lumbar region, if it involves L3, L4, loss of knee jerk and disturbance in micturition, that is passing of urine occurs. Hemisection in the lumbosacral region can lead to loss of control of the sphincter of bladder and anus. So patient may not be even aware of, and he may pass urine or he may pass stool, feces. If there is a hemisection of this lumbosacral region, then the sphincter control is lost and there can be unavoidable, or patient will not even be aware, and there can be discharge of urine or there can be passing of feces and patient is not able to control it. So this all can happen if there is a hemisection at the level of the lumbosacral region. So this was all about the Brown-Sequard syndrome, very important topic from your examination point of view, which was under the section of hemisection of the spinal cord and other spinal cord lesions, which included complete transection, the conditions in which you get complete transection, and we also talked in very short about this primary somatosensory area, this sensory cortex. In the next class, we'll talk about a very important part of the brain, the relay center of the brain for all those pathways which we are talking in our every classes, thalamus. So we'll talk about thalamus in the next class. Thank you, students.